Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Mayor Brown's video series at the Crossroads, CFTC and DOJ enforcement. My name is Matt Kluchenek, a partner at Mayor Brown and a member of Mayor Brown's litigation and dispute resolution group. And I'm joined again by my partner, Glen Kopp, who's also a member of the litigation and dispute resolution group. As a number of you may know, every couple of weeks or so, we seek to bring to you an interesting and timely topic regarding CFTC and DOJ enforcement. And today we're going to focus on communication records and requirements. And so the really kind of, when we think about this sort of issue, it might be along the idea of swap dealer or FCM, future commission merchant personnel, brokers or dealers personnel who are engaged in talking to customers, soliciting customer orders, so on and so forth, and the requirements with respect to collecting, maintaining, and storing those records, as well as the supervisory overlay. There's certainly been a lot of activity from an enforcement perspective in this space. And there's been quite a bit of activity going back a number of years. But it has heated up more recently, and so it's become even more of a hot topic. And so before we get into some CFTC requirements, let me turn it over to Glen Kopp for some remarks.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think this is quite a timely topic given recent enforcement actions and some disclosures related to ongoing investigations, at least from the CFTC side of things, investigations of record keeping procedures and policies. And it's a topic that continues to be relevant in part as we are in a world in which a lot of communications and even communications related to formal business activity are being done while people are away from their desks, on personal phones, and through many different messaging apps, some of which provide for ephemeral messaging or messaging that sort of disappears shortly after the message has been completed. So I think it's a timely topic, and one I think that the CFTC has, as you said, Matt, been focused on for quite a while here, but I think it would be helpful from the CFTC standpoint if you could sort of set out the sort of state of play and where things stand there.
Sure, thanks, Glenn. So in the CFTC space, there really is, frankly, an onslaught of rules and requirements regarding communications. There's statutory provisions, and then there's rules promulgated thereunder. And in the CFTC world, we really kind of break it up between swap dealers and then other types of CFTC registrants like FCMs. And for today's brief discussion, we're going to talk about swap dealers and FCMs. So the requirements are found in different parts of the CFTC rules. Largely, they're very, very similar. But for swap dealers, we want to focus on the Part 23 rules. And there are rules there in 23-201 in particular that essentially say, in short, that swap dealers are required to keep full, complete, systemic records regarding pretty much everything that leads up to a transaction or could lead up to a transaction, including prices, quotes, solicitations, indications of interest, related swap documentation, so on and so forth. So get a relatively robust set of documents that are required to be retained and collected by the swap dealer. And if you look at the FCM rules, the traditional rules of 1.31 and 1.35, which govern FCM communications and records, as well as other CFTC registrants. Again, similar requirements in terms of maintaining full, complete, and systematic records. Importantly, for both swap dealers as well as FCMs, for at least 2 years, those records need to be readily accessible for the CFTC for its review, as well as the DOJ and other regulators. There has been prescribed by the CFTC certain types of requirements regarding how these records are stored, type of media, so on and so forth, but very, very detailed. So that's kind of like the baseline requirements. And then really, really important would be the overlay requirement, and that is supervision. And, there is a There's a particular swap dealer rule and an FCM rule. And of course, for FCMs, it's 166.3, and for swap dealers, it's 23.602. And basically, it's the duty to supervise in the diligent handling of customer accounts, and what that means in terms of records and communications. And so when we think about, as Glenn had talked, issues around approved types of communications that employees may use, is there a way to detect and determine whether or not employees are complying with that? And in the cases that they are, as well as in the cases that perhaps they're not, meaning they're using unapproved devices, is there a way for the registrant to continue to collect data? And where we see issues, where the potential concern is situations where either employees are using unapproved devices, whether cell phones, whether certain types of apps, whatever the case may be, or for whatever reason, it might be as simple as a systems breakdown, it might be a gap, but for some reason, the data is not actually being collected. And those are, again, the two areas of potential concern. Supervisory procedures, at least ones I've seen in this space, a number of them have been drafted many years ago, and frankly, just haven't been updated to reflect relatively recent updates and developments involving communications technology. And so there's a fair number of policies and procedures that are out of date. But beyond that, when it comes to detection and surveillance and seeking to understand whether or not there's compliance, are things like surveys being sent out to brokers and to relevant personnel to try to ensure compliance and elicit information about the types of communication devices that they may be using. What sort of training is ongoing? There's been such a tremendous focus on so many areas, spoofing, manipulation, insider trading, lots of other areas, books and records and communications, at some places have been a little bit left unattended to. And so the CFTC has certainly wanted to make clear to the industry through enforcement actions and otherwise that this is a very, very important part of the puzzle for the CFTC. Effectively creates the audit trail from which the CFTC can launch investigations and develop evidence. So critically important. And so, Glenn, that's kind of baseline from a CFTC perspective. If issues arise, then oftentimes it will dovetail into a DOJ investigation as well. And Glenn, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, Matt. And so the DOJ angle on it is a little simpler in some respects, in that you don't have the array of regulations, right? But what DOJ has done to try to address their concerns with record keeping, in part, to ensure that when they do investigations, that there are records there for them to review, because the paper trail is quite important, especially when it comes to communications. And emails are now almost passé in terms of some of the key types of communications that DOJ might build an investigation or a prosecution on. And so the way DOJ has come at this is that in their corporate enforcement policy, which again came out of the FCPA, or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigations work that DOJ does, their corporate enforcement policy, which sets out the guidance and the requirements for a company seeking to get a declination and full credit for cooperation. One of the key components of that program is full and timely remediation. And what DOJ has done is they have put in a requirement that full and complete remediation requires what they call appropriate retention of business records and prohibiting the improper destruction or deletion of business records, including implementing appropriate guidance and controls on the use of personal communications and ephemeral messaging platforms, so that the company can properly maintain and retain business records and communications, or otherwise comply with the company's document policies and legal obligations. And so that is a requirement of the program. It was formerly a more clear ban or prohibition on the use of ephemeral messaging programs and apps. That is no longer there. I think it's a recognition by DOJ that some companies might have to use that, or that there are expectations in certain industries that clients or customers will be able to communicate such ways with the company. And so this is a recognition that the company is allowed to sort of use its own business judgment to define and design policies and procedures to address the record keeping issues when it comes to messaging apps and communications platforms. So it is a way that DOJ can sort of regulate through enforcement in their own way.
Great, thanks, Glenn. So it's going to conclude it for this session of At the Crossroads. Want to thank everyone for listening and or watching, as the case may be, and we look forward to seeing you for the next episode. Thank you.